According to data from YouTube, only a fraction of the people watching these videos are subscribed, so if you end up liking this video, subscribe. I was halfway to my car before I knew it. Fresh cup of coffee in my hand. Nelly wouldn't let me leave without one. I set the cup of coffee down on the roof of the Dodge and started digging around in my pockets, looking for my keys. A scream ripped out of the restaurant behind me. It was long and loud, sounding like someone had just stuck their hands in a deep fat fryer, or had it forced into one. It startled me and I jumped so much that I dropped my keys. I heard a snort which sounded suspiciously like it was at my expense. I looked over my shoulder as I bent over to grab my keys. Marty's horse, Pistola, was tied up at the parking lot, about 3 spaces down from me. It was technically against city ordinances to tie an animal up in a commercial parking lot, outside of rodeo season of course. There was a special emphasis on undead animals. But if you won't tell, I won't. The skeletal equine was staring at me over a feed bag strapped to his face. I pretended not to notice that the feed bag was stained brown, with a suspicious blackish liquid dripping from the stained burlap. Sometimes in bull's heart, the answers aren't worth the questions. "Cut me some slack, dude," with a voice that may or may not have registered a bit of annoyance. "I'm not a 300-year-old dead horse. Shit creeps me out sometimes." I could have sworn that Pistola rolled his eyes at that. But that may have been me just giving the horse too much credit. Another shorter scream erupted from the diner, this one ended suddenly. The context clues I had at my disposal told me that Marcel was going to be the screaming one in there. Now, were I a normal sheriff's deputy, it would be my job to run into that diner, ready to get to the bottom of it. But I already knew the score and felt no need to investigate further. Plus, fuck that guy. Strippers had no protection under the law, and I was specifically instructed to ensure their safety at my discretion, and I discretified that Marcel was a worthless piece of human wreckage, who should be fed to a wood chipper. His death would truly be a benefit to humanity as a whole. And that was about as far as I was willing to take it. Just as I scooped up my keys, I heard a low, nervous sound from the undead horse. One of those, "Hey, I'm not cool with this" sounds horses make. A rustle of feathers creeping out of the night sky, the horse's call of unease, its only accompaniment. "Fuck," I swore out loud. A rustle of feathers on a nighttime breeze could only mean a few things at Bull's heart, and only one of them would creep out a horse. I stood up straight, looking for it, resting my paw on the handle of my smoke wagon, my fingers wrapping around the checkered grip of the ridiculously large revolver. They always come when the stink of blood is on the air. They bring the cold with them too, as was attested to by the shiver running down my spine, and the light steam I was suddenly exhaling. The hairs on my bare arms stood up in response to the suddenly frigid air. On one level I knew that I was under no immediate threat, but you tell that to 200 years of evolutionary preservation instincts. Shit was there for a reason. Yeah, I suppose you could say the thing perched over the door of Earl's Diner made me uncomfortable. Just a touch. The neon light from the diner's sign cast an odd neon red hue across it. The light seemed to accentuate the shadows it lurked in, but I wouldn't even have to look at the damn thing to know it was watching me. The whole sight of the thing was like watching a demon stalk you. Nobody was really sure where they came from. Nobody who'd been to the great beyond, or any such ports of mystical or metaphysical call, could recall such a creature in any of their travels. I would describe it as a humanoid, with big ragged vulture wings, bipedal body, bird's legs, a man's chest. I usually saw a big fuck-off beak that was attached to a face that looked similar to a plague doctor's mask. But rarely did two people see the same thing when they looked at this creature. Well, for the most part. The going theory is that they were some matter of shapeshifters, and that still left a lot to explain. Everyone described the same ragged wings with the same piercing eyes, orbs of pure white, that burned with a mix of corruption and malevolent anger, like spotlights of hate on a greasy black night. But nobody could agree on the secondary characteristics. To me, they all looked the same, but if I tried to describe what I saw, you wouldn't know what I was talking about, because you saw a horse's head with a seagull's beak for a face, or some other such silliness. This particular creature's wings were drooped over it like a cloak. I could see the eyes boring into me from the inky black recesses of its wings. No notion of a head, or shoulders, or anything could be discerned from the shadows. I glared back at it for a moment, before I took a good Weaver-style shooting position, drew my smoke wagon, and planted its front sight post right smack dab between those dumbass eyes. It did nothing but glare back at me with those huge hate-filled peepers. I couldn't even tell if it understood what was happening, but I could make out its inky black talons flexing on its perch, as if it were about to throw itself forward and rip my belly clean open in a fit of avian fury. Everything in me told me to pull the trigger on my Magnum Research BFR and send a .45-70 government-consecrated exploding saber round right into the thing's forehead. Everything in me wanted to send that unearthly thing back to whatever soulless void it spawned from. The things aren't right for this world, and everything in me was telling me to send it back to where it belonged, to the pit it crawled out of. But technically, under Texas Department of Fish and Game Code, they're classified as an endangered species. So all I could do was whisper, "Bang," like a petulant child, and reluctantly holster my weapon. I'm not horribly mature, I admit. Yeah, sure, they stole dead bodies. Sure, they flew around from dusk till dawn, creeping the living fuck out of people. Sure, they had all the sentience of a learning disabled possum. But some genius decided to call them an endangered species and grant them protected habitats, like the forest surrounding Bull's Heart. Because where the fuck else would they be able to go? The thrice-cursed things are illegal to hunt for sport or harvest, and if you kill one by accident, you better have your ducks in a row, because you're about to be investigated for poaching. Which in Texas means you're about to face a lot of jail time. Which is some fucking liberal bullshit if you ask me. Our local game warden, a fellow named Lingelso, was particular about the animals of what he calls his forest. He also had zero problem running in deputies for violation to the Texas Fish and Game Code. He once arrested a deputy named Landis for taking one down, even though he had a good reason for it. Well, maybe not a good reason exactly, but a pretty damn good excuse. About once a month or so, Deputy Landis has a condition that, well, it's just best that he gets away from people for a couple of days or so. He goes a little wild in that time frame. So he goes out to a plot of land he owns out in the woods and just rides it out. Safe for everyone that way. During one of these fits, I guess you could call it, he took down one of those creatures and ate half of it. Warden Lingelso took him in for it. It didn't matter that Deputy Landis wasn't in his right frame of mind. He still didn't have a population control hunting license, which was the only way to legally hunt them. Sheriff Unruh had gone to bat for the deputy, going as far to cite the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, trying to point that Landis had a condition and a certain ascension had to be made in order to provide a fair and equal environment for him, including free-rein hunting rights for the thing that lives inside him. Lingelso wasn't buying it, though. Laws be laws, the game warden said. In my forest and my jurisdiction, the laws be respected. Sanctimonious do-gooder prick. But the creatures did a good job of keeping their numbers low, and they didn't really go out of their way to attack people. Unless cornered. Which is a good thing, because when they were worked up into a good lather, they can take and dish out a lot of punishment before they finally go down. Kind of like a skyborn armadillo. Only less cute. This specimen, as if sensing my unease, leaned forward and screeched at me. I got the impression of a beak sticking out from between its wings. The screeching was loud in the frigid silence. It gave off the audio sensation of nails on a chalkboard mixed with a crying newborn. A pretty unpleasant mixing of audible input. Then the burning eyes turned back to Pistola, and I briefly wondered if the creature was going to go after the undead horse. I mean, they were Death Eaters, and technically the horse was dead after all. I would legally be allowed to shoot it at that point, as Pistola was technically livestock. Dead stock. Anyway, in Bull's Heart, you can defend tame animals from wild animals, especially with all the weird crap that lives in our woods. But before I could sink much into the thought of it, the creature reared on its haunches, gave one last terrifying screech and took wing, quickly disappearing into the night sky. My caveman ego wanted to believe that it was because the creature was made uncomfortable by my presence. But more than likely he'd figured the staff of the Toothy Earls weren't going to toss Mercil's corpse out the front door, so there's no point in hanging around. Either way, Pistola seemed to be okay with the end result, as he let out a sigh of equine relief as the potential predator made its exit. I watched the night sky in the direction it flew off for a moment, wondering if it was going to change its mind and come back. They have a name, like we don't just call them creatures. I just happen to think the name's stupid, real fucking stupid, because it's not a hot chick on a winged horse swinging a sword. It is in no way, shape, or form a Valkyrie. And yes, that is the hill I'm willing to die on. It's a fucking bird monster, not a chick who escorts dead warriors to the Allfather's table. Can't put that shit on the side of a paneled van from the 70s. End of discussion. I just call them shitbirds. When I was sure that the shitbird was gone for good, I turned and gave Pistola a nod. "You're safe now, sir," I said with a professional smile. "You're welcome." The horse just stared back at me with milky dead eyes. He seemed super unimpressed. "Fine," I said with a bit of feigned exasperation. "Act like that thing didn't have you scared out of your peanut-sized mind." The horse snorted again at me, and I swear he managed to roll his pupilless white eyes at me. The damn horse was smarter than he was letting on. I shook my head and turned back to the Charger. But as I got to the Dodge, I thought I heard something. Like words floating out of the dark. Scratchy. Raspy. Just at the point of hearing. The point where you aren't sure if it's your inner monologue or your ears, and I definitely wasn't quite sure which one it was. "The master comes." I stared off in the direction the creature had flown. Now that was odd. I couldn't be sure if I heard it, but I couldn't completely write it off either. I knew the way to the Miller's house like the back of my hand. We were out there enough after all. The Millers were two people that shouldn't have been together, but they were also extremely stubborn. Neither was going to be the one who broke first and left. They also refused to admit they had problems, even when they were doing their best to rip each other apart. Made conflict mediation between the two parties a royal bitch. They were one of the reasons I hated this godforsaken town. I was going to meet up with Grook and Dollywall at the foot of Miller's Drive, and we would go up to their property as a group. It's usually best to go out in calls with as much backup as possible, especially in this town. I briefly thought about Grook's condition. I glanced down towards the digital defensive control suite sitting in the middle of my patrol car's center console. The screen that showed the UV defensive lighting rig that sat on the roof of the up-armored Charger Hellcat cruiser was off. I reached down and tapped the button off just to be sure. I then reached over and hit the manual safety, locking it out of action. A lot of citizens of Bullsheart had one condition or another that made UV light anything from annoying to downright lethal. So much so that the local government classified UV lights as destructive devices. If you had some, you better have a very damn good reason for having them, or you were going to jail. Occasionally, certain people would kick up a stink about it, make some noise about being in violation of the Second Amendment, but they usually didn't get much support because, well, it's real hard to get people worked up about light bulbs. It would have been a damn shame to take Grook and possibly Dollywall out of action, due to some avoidable ass-hatted dipshittery. I actually wasn't sure if the UV would take Dollywall down or not, but I did know his kind were nocturnal, so better safe than sorry. I turned down the dirt road that would take me to Miller's front gate. Something about the way the lights of my cruiser played down the narrow tree-lined dirt road gave me an ominous feeling. I was hoping it wouldn't be a sign of things to come. "Here the fuck we go," I grumbled out loud. I saw Grook's SUV and Dollywall's cruiser parked next to the Miller's cattle gate. Grook had to drive one of the bigger SUVs due to their massive size. "More like her massive ass," I said to myself, giving myself a slight chuckle in response. Found myself hilarious. And before you ask, yes, I'm aware that I am an idiot. I parked behind the big SUV and got out. But not before I let dispatch know I was there. "Gin, Whiskey Hotel, 1023 at Miller's," I told dispatch over the radio. "Roger that, Whiskey Hotel, good luck." "Roger. Thanks. Out." Dollywall and Grook were standing out in front of the latter's cruiser, looking up the property. Grook turned her massive head my way, the black pupils of her eyes seeming to dig right through me as she stared. Her lips parted slightly and she gave me a disdainful sneer. "Oh, look," she said, sounding gruff and vaguely British, like a bad guy from Lord of the Rings movie. "They sent a perfect little Umi to back us up." The look on her face could have frozen fire. She looked like she wanted to rip open my belly and play with what she found there. She squared up her shoulders like she was ready to throw down, and raised her hands up to her shoulder height, flexing every muscle she had in her upper body. Her jaw fell open, revealing some nasty gleaming white canines, a threat display if there ever was one. Her body armor and her duty belt did nothing except add to the idea that she was prepped and ready for a real slobber knocker. She took a step forward, looking every bit of a bruiser as she really was. From the top of her ponytail to the soles of her size 20 black Bates combat boots, she was built for war. Literally. That's what her race had been bred for. "Only thing Umis is good for is filling bellies." Dollywall looked over at her with a what the fuck look on his face. He seemed genuinely surprised by her words and aggressive actions. He looked over at me, his big yellow-green eyes going wide. He raised his hand to his beard and stroked it a few times, looking back and forth between us, and I got the feeling that was how his nerves liked to show themselves. The palms of his hands faced outwards, and his fingers seemed to go backwards like their joints were reversed. He was a transfer from another town like Bull's Heart, somewhere in Florida. Thunder, or maybe it was Cougar Teeth? Not that it mattered, I guess. He'd only been with the sheriff's department a couple of weeks now. Now most of that had been training time. He may have been a veteran, but here in Texas, he was the new guy, and he was still trying to figure out what was what. The look on his face said that he wasn't quite sure what he had found himself in the middle of here, but he wasn't a fan of it. I wasn't used to the backwards hands thing yet, and it was a little weird for me. Tigerhead was putting me off too, but that was easier to get used to. Seemed like a hell of a nice guy so far though. Like he really worked hard to dispel the negative views most people had towards the free-form shapeshifters. He didn't need to though. He wouldn't have earned his star if he were an asshole. I tried to come up with a witty zinger to shoot back at Grook, but I was drawing a blank. I almost went with Old Reliable, a Shrek reference. But I wasn't feeling it, so I raised my hands to my waist, making sure not to spill my coffee, a mugged and sarcastically terrified expression at her. "Oh, scary," I said with the most mockingly insincere voice I could muster, rolling my eyes as hard as I could. "Cut the fucking shit, Grook, you're scaring the new guy." "Watch your language," Rook said suddenly, dropping the bad movie orc accent like a bad habit. Her real voice sounded more like a housewife from somewhere in the Midwest, like Nebraska or some shit. Flat, but somehow bubbly. You always had that suspicion that the next word out of her mouth was going to be, "Ope." "And besides, he isn't scared, he already knows I'm a total sweetie," she said, fixing him with a wide smile, which, despite the fact it showed off her massive fang canines, still managed to come across as incredibly warm and inviting. Like someone's mom. "I gave my famous oatmeal cookies. Would a big nasty evil orc make cookies for the new guy?" She directed the last question to Dollywall. He looked like he was still in shock from the rapid shift in tones. His eyes were wide and his jaw was still slightly hanging open. I could tell that he wasn't exactly sure if we were playing a game of fuck with the new guy. He shifted his gaze between our faces. He swallowed, a bit nervously. "Well..." His voice had that crisp English accent a lot of educated Indian immigrants had, when they learned their English at a British-founded university. You could tell from his tone that he wasn't super comfortable in the situation. "The... cookies..." I got the feeling that he had to mentally restrain himself from saying biscuits. "Did have raisins in them, so the question of your being a sweetie or something of a malicious sort hasn't really been settled just yet." It took me a second, but I got the humor. The fucker was just so damn dry in his delivery that it almost didn't land. I gave him a chuckle. I got the impression that he was going to be an okay guy to work with. Once he got settled, that is. Grook, however, stared at him for a moment. She didn't quite give a laugh, but she did give him another award-winning smile. She placed her left fist on her waist and pointed at him with another hand. "I'm gonna have to keep my eye on you, mister," she said with a bit of humor in her voice. "And don't you worry about the raisins. Just my way of messing with the new guy, I guess. But don't worry. They help the body increase blood production. That's good for you. And me. Dollywall waited for a beat before giving Grook a wide-eyed, nervous chuckle, before breaking eye contact and looking down to make sure his boots were still on his feet. His timid response set me off. I let loose a stifled laugh. I squeezed my eyes shut and laughed into the back of my hand, my side shaking. Now, Dollywall wasn't a small guy. He was broad across the shoulders, had fangs and claws of his own, a gun too. I didn't know him too well, but I could bet that he could take care of himself in a fight. His kind were usually pretty good with their mitts. Or at least, that's what I heard about them. That might just be a stereotype, though. If it is, and any one of you out there reading this, or of the Rakshasa people, that have a problem with it, please know that I meant nothing by it. But when a person of Grook's size and ability, friendly disposition or not, makes a mention of your platelet count, it could be a little disconcerting, especially since Grook, in addition to being one of the largest specimens of orc you would ever meet, was also afflicted with vampirism. She was hell on wheels without the condition. Half the department called her Mama Bear, because if you were down and bleeding, you needed someone to drag your ass out of the fire. She was the one you would want arriving on the scene. Believe me, I know it's like lying on your back, getting the shit kicked out of you, looking up and seeing Grook coming charging onto the scene like a cross between the Incredible Hulk and Jesus Christ. But as to how she came across her vampirism, it's actually kind of a sweet story. A few years back, she fell for a local gal named Maddie, and they got married. Maddie was a vampire. In good standing, of course. But then again, she had to be, because rogue vampires got run out of town pretty quickly, if not staked down for the morning sun. A man by the name of Kincaid ran the local vampire coven, and he was a stickler for the rules of fair conduct, which the United Nightwalker covens and clans of the United States, Mexico, and Canada had applied to towns like Bull's Heart. Kincaid ran a tight ship, and the sheriff's department had rarely, if ever, had a reason to pick a fight with the bloodsuckers. Well, except that one time, but that's neither here nor there. Plus, we don't like to talk about it around here. It would be especially impolite to discuss it with outsiders. Anyway, the point is that with the vampirism accentuating her already considerable strength and hardness, she had gone from hell on wheels to a one-woman SEAL team. Part of the lovely couple's wedding vows had been Maddie converting Grook into a vampire. Maddie had taken Grook's name, and Grook had taken Maddie's condition. I had to admit, it twanged on the dusty strings of my heart. For some reason, it struck me as beautiful. To not only tell someone you want to be with them forever, but take steps to actually do so? Well, I'm not going to lie. I shed a few happy tears at the wedding. I guess I'm a bit of a softy. Senior Deputy Grook, I said, doing my best to come to Dollywall's rescue. If you could quit subtly terrifying the new guy for a moment, I think we got us a wellness visit to make. If you would like to take charge and lead your valiant warriors on a crusade in the name of public safety, now would be a good time for that. Oh, party pooper, Grook said, drew up to her full height and turned to look at the miller's house. It was a white ranch style sitting on top of a slight hill. The lights were off and nobody appeared to be home. Okay, she said, looking down at me. First things first, cowboy, she said, pointing down at the Magnum Research FBR in my holster. Go to the trunk of your car and get a gun that isn't stupid. God damn it, I grumbled. 5 minutes later, we were walking up the miller's driveway. A 5th generation Glock 40 sitting in my holster. We had to hoof it up to the property, because the cattle gate across the driveway was locked, which wouldn't have mattered, because once a car crossed the miller's gate, it tends to experience engine trouble, never getting 20 feet before shutting down completely. Radios had issues too. Hell, the 3D RMR night sight on my pistol was probably dead. Like its 10-year battery had run out. It was something to do with the nature of the millers, and the magic they threw around. Electronics hated the stuff for some reason, so normally we just left anything that had a battery in the car. I was staring up at the house as we walked. It was odd. Usually at this point we could hear them screaming at each other, the pop and fizzle of magic spells going off. Inhuman roaring as demons were summoned. Not to attack, but to help bolster arguments. Dishes breaking, too. Tonight, though, it was different. Dead silence, like the house was a tomb. My eyes were going from window to window, looking for any sign of life and finding none. No fluttering curtains, lights popping on and off. No, nothing. Just the crunch of our boots on the old asphalt. I almost didn't notice the temperature drop until I was exhaling steam. I shivered inside my uniform. I was just about to ask where the fuck did that come from when Dollywall spoke up. "We're being watched," he said quietly. "I see them too," Grook said, all merriment lost in her voice. She was switched on now and jokes would be unprofessional. She eased the AR pistol she carried off her belt. It was chambered in .458 SOCOM, and of course the entire lower was custom made to fit her gigantic hand, including a massive grip that resembled the handle of a 1911 pistol rather than the traditional AR group, making it the next best thing to a bolter. "I count 12 in the trees on the west side of the clearing." "I count 8 on my side," Dollywall replied, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I can't see shit," I said, wishing I had some form of natural night vision like my creature in the night comrades. "Valkyrie," was all Grook said. "Shit," I muttered. "Language," Grook gently admonished, without taking her eyes off the trees on the edges of the clearing. I followed her eyes out to the trees. I could just barely make out little pinpoints of white light. That would have been the eyes of the shitbirds. I whistled lowly. There was a bunch of them out here. I'd never seen so many in one place. Usually, when there's more than 2 or 3 in one spot, they would fight each other. It looked like these assholes were just copping a squat and having a watch. Very odd behavior for shitbirds. "I've never seen so many," Dollywall said, a tremor of discomfort in his voice. I noticed that his tail was held down, close to his leg. It might have been a good tactical decision to help keep appendage out of the way, or might have been an involuntary fear-based response. "Don't let them get to you," Grook said, her voice soaked in matronly concern. "They never come for us, just for the dead." "Yeah," I said, turning my attention to the house. "Boss lady's right. Pay them no mind." Took a sip from the coffee cup I was still holding. I was intentionally trying to look as nonchalant as possible, partially for the new guy, partially for the fact that I wasn't going to give the shitbirds the satisfaction of spooking me twice in one night. I did my best to walk like I didn't have a care in the world. Dollywall looked over his shoulder at me. His eyes widened slightly when he recognized the stylized alligator in my cup. Toothy Earl's logo. "Were you at Toothy Earl's earlier?" he asked me, his ears perking straight up. Was Miss Ellie working?" "Yep," I responded. He was breaking in a new striper. Didn't go so hot for him. "Ah," new guy said. "Do you happen to know if she is, talking to anyone?" "She talks to a lot of people," I said, plain dumb. "It's part of her job, silly boots." "Oh, no," he said, turning back to watch his side of the clearing and the Valkyrie in the trees beyond. "I meant, is she in a relationship with anyone?" "Well," I said, continuing on the plain dumb vein, "I'm sure she has lots of relationships with a lot of people." "Be nice," Grook grunted at me. "You know what he meant," she said to me. To Dollywall, she said, "Yes, there's a fella she talks to, but I don't think it's serious. Tall, blonde, human. A lot of people might think he's that one lightning guy, the one with the hammer. What's his name? It doesn't matter." Her voice picked up in a little more than a growl as she went on, apparently remembering that we're supposed to be focused on the task at hand. "Both of you pay attention to your sectors, or I'll treat you both like a couple of juice boxes and call out another couple of dum-dums to back me up, and I've sucked you both dry," Dollywall said, responding to the matronly authority of her voice. "Yeah," I said, properly scolded and not even attempting to go for the obvious joke here. "Sorry, boss." She was right. Now wasn't the time for jaw-jacking. She had left it unsaid, but there were more shitbirds out here than anyone could ever see in one spot. They were acting strangely. This was the quietest Miller's call I'd ever been out on. I would wager it was one of Grook's quietest ones too. It was too weird of a night to be acting like a dumbass rookie. There was a time to fuck with a new guy, and this wasn't it clearly. I followed Grook's lead and drew my Glock. I checked the RMR sight and noticed that the dot was in fact no longer illuminated on the glass, like the battery was dead. Fucking Millers and their spooky-ass hoodoo. The rest of the short walk was quiet. I watched the front where the house was. Grook and Dollywall watched my sides. They stayed quiet. I would occasionally peek off to the side, at the trees in the distance. White eyes beamed back at me, making them look like underdressed, sparsely decorated Christmas trees. I kinda wish we were talking more, as the feeling of all those eyes on me was driving me crazy. Felt like ants skittering up and down my spine. Some light conversation would have been great to take my mind off the current events. When we reached the house, Grook mounted the steps to the porch and paused. She looked around. She tilted her head up to the side and sniffed the air around her. She suddenly tensed up. "What?" I asked her. "Blood. Lots of it. Human." Now, were this the movies, the vampire would look at me like a pot roast and get a strange look in her eyes. But this isn't the movies, and Senior Deputy LaVonda Grook is a goddamn professional, and I'll not have you imply otherwise. She treated it like a call for help and instantly got ready to run into an unknown situation to potentially save a life. She raised her massive pistol and trained it on the door. She motioned to me with her head, telling me to kick the door for her. She looked at Dollywall and patted herself on the backside, wordlessly telling him to stack on her. He nodded as he did what he was instructed. I leaned against the opposite side of the door, back against the wall. I raised my leg and swung it back, giving the door a donkey kick. The door flew open in an explosion of cheap trim and paint flakes. Grook and Dollywall flowed into the house, Grook having to duck down in the doorway so she didn't bang her head on the door jamb. "Sheriff's Department!" she yelled. The living room was empty of life. There was a stone tablet set where the coffee table would be in a normal house, with stone bowls and unidentifiable powders in them. Jars full of God knows what lined the massive bookshelf that covered the entire wall. Candles lit the space, some burned all the way down. Looked like they'd been going at this for a while. Strange symbols were painted everywhere. I recognized a couple of them, just from being on the job so long. This looked like the wizard's lab or a witch's brewery. Probably was, knowing the Millers. "Claire!" I heard Dollywall yell, his voice a bit more of a roar with the adrenaline surging through his veins. Grook looked over at me. She pointed to her nose and then pointed towards the door leading off the living room. She then patted her backside, got behind her, ready to go wherever she would take me. Grook always took point. She was the one most likely to survive a shotgun blast to the face and stay in the fight. So it made good tactical sense, but it was also the way that she led, from the front. We left Dollywall in the living room to hold our only known exit, in case someone skirted past us. Grook and I cleared the rest of the house, finding nothing. We came to a stop at a closed door at the end of the main hall. She looked at me and tapped her nose again. I got her meaning. This is where the smell was the strongest. I nodded and reached down for the doorknob. I jiggled the handle, finding it unlocked. I shoved it open and in went Grook, pistol at the ready. I followed behind her. The smell of tangy copper hit me in the snout like a bag of hammers. I involuntarily gagged. I couldn't see anything. It was pitch black, but I knew it was bad. The room smelled like a badly ran slaughterhouse. Felt around for a light switch. Found a candelabra instead. Good enough, I thought to myself as I dug around my pocket for my lighter. I gave the Bic a couple of test flicks. "Wait," Grook said from somewhere in the darkness. "It's bad. It's real bad." "Yeah," I said. I'd gathered from the smell. How bad can it be? I lit the candle, and it must have been a candle with some magic to it, because it lit the room like a surgery ward, and Grook was right. It was bad. It was real bad. It was a bedroom. You could tell because of the massive California-sized king bed occupying the center of the room. The comforter was soaked in reddish-brown blood. There was a lump of meat in the center of the bed that I slowly recognized to be a woman's torso. On one nightstand there was 10 neatly severed fingers, in 2 columns of 5 each. On the other nightstand was a head, devoid of a face, just ragged skull staring at the doorway. At the foot of the bed were 2 legs, crossed over each other like an X. I realized that the various organs and bits of body were arranged around the torso in a circle. I looked over at Grook. She was staring wide-eyed at the wall above the headboard. I followed her gaze. The face of Jasilda Miller stared back at us from the wall, where it had been nailed up like a trophy on display. Eyeless, of course, because the eyes were still in the skull. But I knew that face. It had screamed all matter of venom and curse at me before. There was something weird about this. Well, yeah, no shit, it was weird. There was a strange sort of order to where everything was placed in the room. I looked over at Grook. She looked back at me. I saw her swallow a few times, like she wasn't sure what to make of all this. Her face looked almost helpless, and I felt bad for the giant orc. She started to speak, her voice a little unsteady. She paused and closed her eyes. She swallowed a few more times. "We need to get out of this room," she said, more in control of her voice. "Yeah," I said, moving towards the door. I'd seen this level of carnage before, part of the job. People say when you see shit like this enough, eventually get used to it. Well, I'm still waiting on that fucking day. "Forensics will have our butts," Grook said, command voice firmly in place. "If we mess something up." "Yeah," I said, not particularly giving a shit why we got out of the room, but just happy to do so. We pulled Dollywall out of the house with us, Grook closing the door behind us to preserve the crime scene. We spun him up on what we'd seen. His eyes narrowed at the thought. "What?" Grook asked. "Back in Florida, we had a necromancer in the town." "Oh, fuck," I interrupted with a sigh, knowing where this was going. Necromancers were bastards, and I didn't want to have to deal with chasing one down. I had one throw a dead cat at me once. It bit me. Shit was weird. Grook did that handshake shushing thing that moms do when we were interrupting their shows. She wanted me to stick a sock in it. Probably had a problem with me cursing too. "What you describe," Dollywall went on, "sounds like a ritual she did. We never found out why she did it. We figured out who it was and showed up at her doorstep with a lot of firepower. She did not come peacefully." The look on his face and the way that he stroked his beard said it was a bad memory. Grook had an uncomfortable look on her face too, and I couldn't say I blamed her. This could be real bad. If somebody was going around killing people for silly necromancer bullshit, well, my week was about to get a lot fucking busier. It's always something in this fucking town. "Okay," Grook said. "So let's get down past the gate and see if we can get some backup out here." "Gonna have to wake up the sheriff," I said. "She'll be pissed if we don't. But in the meantime, we need to get people on the lookout for Mark Miller. His whereabouts are unknown, so that makes him our only suspect at this point." And since the powers that be have a sense of fucking humor, I heard a rustle of wings above our heads. Right before about 200 pounds of meat was dropped right in the middle of our powwow. It was a body. The legs caught me square in the chest, knocking me on my ass. The face attached to the body's head sure looked a lot like Mark Miller's face, albeit a little more battered and beaten than usual. Dead bodies have a certain look about them, and Mark Miller was rocking the fuck out of that look, broken neck and all. All 3 of us looked up. A Valkyrie hovered about 20 feet above us, its wings wide open, like it was riding a thermal. Its eyes blazed as it glared at us from on high. I'd never seen one not skulking in the shadows. I'd never seen one this brazen before. It opened its beak and screeched down at us.